Hello, YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Tomorrow's Talk Today. I'm your host, Nick Robinson, and today I'm joined by my panelists, JR, Jess, Kurt, and Liam. On today's episode, we will be discussing the Marvel and DC cinematic universes. We will talk about the history of both sides and some prevalent social issues showcased in the universes, and our panelists' opinions on the two companies. To begin our discussion, let's take a quick look at a clip that gives some insight into the DC universe.
You see, in DC Comics, any number of objects can occupy the same physical space as others as long as they're all vibrating at different frequencies. After all, that's how the Flash frequently vibrates through walls, which is no coincidence, considering that the concept of the multiverse was actually introduced in the groundbreaking storyline The Flash of Two Worlds, in The Flash number 123 in 1961. In it, Barry Allen is performing a bunch of tricks for a fundraiser, until he mysteriously vanishes and appears in another universe, specifically Earth 2. When Barry encounters the Flash of this universe, Jay Garrick, he comes to the conclusion that both universes must occupy the same space, but at different frequencies.
Well, as you can see from that clip, there is a lot going on in the DC universe, and our panelists know even more, along with Marvel. So let's jump into our discussion. Liam, what do you see as a major difference between the DC and Marvel universes?
Yeah, Nick, there's a couple things I see as different between the two. I think generally DC talks a lot about more kind of like social justice issues, a lot darker. The Joker that came out a few years ago with Joaquin Phoenix, and most recently the new Batman also. They kind of tie into mental health, police brutality, stuff like that. Whereas Marvel, I think, is a little bit more lighthearted. Also, the characters, on a lighter note, are a little bit different as well. DC, you see, they're kind of born with these powers. You got Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman. As in the MCU, they kind of have to go through trials or something happens to them. So you see Captain America goes through the super soldier program, and the Hulk is exposed to gamma radiation, and that's how he changed. So that's like just a couple differences right there on how they differ.
Excellent. And I do agree that DC is a little bit more mature. They handle stronger subject matter, but we'll get into that a bit later in the show. My next question is for you, Jess. Do you believe that Marvel and DC are marketed for different audiences?
I do. I think that Marvel's marketed more towards the family, whereas DC's more marketed towards a mature audience, and you can really see that in the themes that DC portrays, like Liam was saying, mental illness and police brutality, whereas Marvel's, their themes are more about taking care of one another, just being a good person, and themes that everyone in the family can enjoy, whereas if I were a parent, I probably wouldn't let my kid watch the new Batman.
Right. I saw it myself. It gets a little mature at times. There's some awesome moments, but definitely not for the younger children. And that leads us right into our next question. JR, what impact do the family audiences have on Marvel and DC movies?
I think they play a huge impact. Definitely one of the major sources of revenue for Marvel. DC, I feel like not so much. Kind of what Jess was saying, that DC is very dark. I don't think I'd let my young kids, if I had any, watch DC movies. I would much prefer them to watch Marvel just because it preaches unity and togetherness of pretty much everyone, brings families together. And I think that is what gives them their big bucks.
And that's why they do so well at the box office. I mean, it seems like every Marvel movie nowadays makes $1 billion.
Yeah.
Kirk, do you believe these films have a deeper meaning to them?
Yeah, I definitely think there are deeper meanings behind superhero films in general. Superheroes are made to inspire us and the audience and give you someone to look up to. And I think both of these franchises do this very well in their own ways. For Marvel, the example I always think about is Captain America. And in his first movie, Steve's this little scrawny soldier that wants to go off and fight for his country. And, he has the heart of a lion and is willing to do anything to serve his country, but just doesn't have the physical capabilities to prove it. To test his courage, the general in the movie throws a decoy grenade towards a group of soldiers, and Steve is the only one that runs towards it and jumps on it and shows that he's willing to die for others and protect others from the blast. All the other soldiers ran away, and it was in that moment that we knew that Steve was worthy of holding the Captain America title, and that kind of just is a life lesson to not be selfish, protect others, and kind of just shows the traits of what a Captain America should be.
Right.
And-
And it like the whole lesson of that movie is to like not let anything change like who you are on the inside. It's what's on the inside that counts. And they amplify that with the whole super soldier serum and how it just amplifies what's already inside. Like if you're a good the saying is good becomes great, bad becomes worse.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely think that these movies can teach us life lessons and inspire us to be the best humans that we can be.
What life lessons can we learn from DC movies?
Oh man.
Honestly, I don't really think you can learn any life lessons from DC movies. Whenever I watch them, I've never figured them out. It just kind of seems like a character's introduced, they go around, beat the tar out of some bad guys, and then they save the day. Whereas with Marvel, they, like Liam was saying, they have to go through some trial to earn their power, to like really see what it means to be a hero and to hold that power. And like the big saying in Spider-Man goes, with great power comes great responsibility.
Oh, come on. Batman teaches you how to be vengeance. Thank you. You all bring up some very good points about the background and history of the MCU and DC Extended Universe. We have to take a quick break. We'll be right back, so stay tuned.
You're listening to WMLU 91.3 FM, the music of Longwood University and Farmville, Virginia. Rebound to Phillips. Great, strong rebound by Cody Phillips. Then Jordan Tinker with the mid-range jumper. Goes down off the backboard.
So the sports committee within WMLU is an award-winning committee in itself, and it's an opportunity for people to be able to call Division I athletic events. Basketball, we've done soccer, we've done softball for the first time last year. This year we're doing tennis for the first time, which I'm excited about, as well as baseball in the mix as well. So it's an opportunity for people to get on-air experience, learn who they are as a play-by-play, on-air talent. There's a lot of different things that kind of come with that.
All right, so with WMLU Sports, there's always 3 people working a game. So usually there'll either be 2 people calling the game, color and play-by-play, and then there'll be 1 person in the studio working the soundboard right here. The soundboard is to make sure that the guys or girls at that game are sounding good. They can hear them over the air or the web stream. If there's any problems, the person in the studio is able to adapt and adjust and make sure that everything here is working well.
I'm a proud Longwood graduate, COMM class of 2011, and there is no way I would be here if it weren't for my time behind the mic at WMLU, the music of Longwood University and the award-winning home of your Longwood Lancers.
So this is an opportunity to grow, learn, figure out what works best for you, what skills you have, what makes you a good on-air talent, good play-by-play person. But it's also, of course, an opportunity to just meet new people with similar interests. Inherently, if you're joining the sports committee, you probably like sports. And then everybody else in the room does too. So it's an opportunity to grow, make new friends, and have that commonality between other individuals.
11:44 left in the second half, which brings us to our under 12-minute media timeout. So we'll come back with Harper Baker at the Charity Stripe here on WMLU Farmville 91.3 FM.
Welcome back. Next, we're going to be focusing on some of the social issues shown in these universes. First, let's take a look at this clip from Marvel Studios' Captain Marvel.
Space invasion, big car chase. Truth be told, I was ready to hang it up till I met you today. So you're not from around here?
It's hard to explain. I keep having these memories.
With Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, and many other moments of representation in these films, there's a lot of room for discussion, so let's get started. Jess, do you think it's important for these movies, both Marvel and DC, to discuss important social justice issues?
I do think it is important for these movies to discuss important social justice issues. Just recently with Spider-Man and the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, there's a lot of people in the audience of Spider-Man who identify with that community. And when Marvel does decide to support that bill, you're basically telling the audience of the LGBT community members that Marvel isn't there for them. And when they look up to these heroes and they see that these heroes are associated with that company, it's easy to become disheartened. Whereas with other social justice issues like women's representation, it's important to have that conversation because women historically are neglected in the superhero film. They're typically left as the side piece, the eye candy, or the one character that gets killed so that the plot can continue. So by having these discussions and making these stances that these issues are important to Marvel, these issues, like these people matter, it doesn't alienate this audience.
Yeah, and like you say with the Don't Say Gay bill, it is kind of a slap in the face for Disney to sort of not step in there and like say they would support it, because they just had their first like openly gay character in Eternals, and so like that community finally thought they were going to be represented and that Marvel was on their side and that Disney was on their side, and then this happens. And then like you say with the representation of women, like I do think Marvel has done a better job than DC at that, because DC, it's basically just Wonder Woman at this point, and Marvel's done a better job of that in recent years, and they've done a better job at like making women a vital part of the story. Like, all you have to do is pay attention to Black Widow. In her first appearance in Iron Man 2, she's definitely mostly eye candy. But then as her story goes on, they make her like a more important character. And she ultimately, like, her arc is capped off by her being the one to like sacrifice herself to get the Soul Stone in Endgame. Spoilers. Liam, next question is for you. Do you think it's important for these movies to have representation? Like, do you think they add anything to the overall story, or do you think the studios are just checking a box?
I definitely think it's important. I think towards the later years, they're obviously like wanting, times change and they want to get more female leading roles involved. And I think that's a great thing. With DC, I don't see too much of it. I mean, you have Wonder Woman and Catwoman and things like that. But especially with Marvel, like you were saying, I think they've been doing a much better job than they have in the past, especially in reference to Phase 1 and Phase 2. Black Widow has her own movie now, which is great. Captain Marvel, we just watched the trailer for it. I personally love that movie. I think she's a great superhero. WandaVision, she just had her own show. And even with Hawkeye, who, it's really about Hawkeye and stuff like that, but one of the main characters is Kate Bishop, who's a female leading role in that. So I think it's important. I think they're doing a lot better job in showing that not all superheroes have to be the stereotypical male figure. Mm-hmm. Superheroes can be females and just as powerful and just as effective as any other male character.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that two of the top three most powerful heroes in the MCU right now, Captain Marvel and Scarlet Witch, are both female.
Yeah.
Scarlet Witch is definitely in the top two.
I'd put her up there high.
Like, I'm excited to see her and Doctor Strange teaming up in the Multiverse of Madness.
I am very excited for that movie.
JR, do you think there are some groups that have yet to be represented in these movies? Do you think they could do a better job at representing all races, sexual orientations, genders?
Well, I definitely think Marvel has done a exceptional job of being inclusive and showing that different representations of many groups. However, DC, I feel like, has a long way to go. I feel like every time they try to get a movie going, they kind of have to restart, and it doesn't give enough opportunities for there to be new roles. Like, I don't know, Catwoman, she's a great representation of female roles, but that's like, they don't have much else after that, Wonder Woman, Catwoman, that's pretty limiting on their whole thing. Like, Marvel has tons of female superheroes.
Right, and DC, I mean, like you said, they kind of struggle to get off the ground, so like they can't even really seem to get the like basic movie making process right, let alone the representation. Like they it feels like every few years they're like restarting their whole cinematic universe.
Although I will have to say, Suicide Squad,
which one? Because remember
right.
They rebooted it and they're like, now it's the Suicide Squad.
Okay, so I'd say the first one. I haven't seen the second one with the shark, right? That's the second one with the shark, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know what representation the shark is, but
Thank you. We can all agree that there's a lot to consider here. Don't tune out just yet. We'll be right back to discuss our opinions on the Marvel and DC universes here on tomorrow's Talk Today.
The Communication Studies Department has always prided itself on having our students do original research. And in the fall of 2018, when I was teaching that class, I wanted to look for a way to have our students present that research in a different manner. And I did a little research and I could not find anyone else who had live streamed original undergraduate research. So I kind of came up with the idea to have the students present it, and Dr. Paul was very agreeable here. And so rather than doing a traditional poster session or something like that, we came up with the idea to have our students present their research in front of the camera. And the cool thing about that is the distribution is much wider than it would be typically. Parents, alumni, friends of the department all got to watch that research, and the students also had something that was more lasting that they could look at later in life than a traditional poster format.
So one of the ultimate aims of doing research is that you get to share it with somebody, and that it's just not for yourselves or just to have some sort of document. It's to be able to disseminate that research, whether you have significant findings or not. And so being able to have an audience for your research project is paramount. And having an opportunity to live stream it gives students an awesome opportunity to be able to share it with a large audience.
So being in the studio, there's just nothing like that. It's the whole overall experience. You got the cameras, the lights, everything in front of you, being on the stage, and all the information's there, and you'll have one take to get that information out as efficiently as you can, compared to having a poster session where people come and go as they please and you're just set at one spot for X amount of time. So being in the studio, it's just a great experience, nothing like it.
Thanks for sticking with us. To end our discussion today, let's take a look at one last clip from The Batman.
Fear is a tool. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning. I've been trying to reach you. Find the gun! This is about a king.
We can see a change in content for the DC universe. JR, let's start with your opinions on Marvel versus DC. Which do you prefer?
Personally, I prefer DC, only because, growing up, my grandpa was obsessed with Superman, so I kind of grew up in that Superman household. I, of course, loved the original Batman movies, but I don't know, DC's always kind of been my vibe. I kind of like seeing the bad guys win every once in a while. What about you, though?
Yeah, I feel like Marvel does have the good guys win a lot more. Like, the whole, oh crap point of Avengers Infinity War was that they finally did have the bad guy win, but I can't say that I grew up on only Marvel movies, because I did have the Christian Bale Batman movies to watch when I was little, but I will have to say I am on the Marvel side, because my first love of with superhero movies, the series of movies that got me started, that made me such the nerd I am today, was the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. Those were my entire childhood. I don't care if people say they're bad and campy. They're mine.
Tobey Maguire, honestly, I think is the best Spider-Man, hands down. He's just goated.
Yeah, there's a reason. Well, there's cases to be made for each Spider-Man, but I feel like a lot of people use nostalgia as their main point as to why Tobey's the best. Kurt, what do you think draws people to both Marvel and DC?
Personally, for me, I've always liked how Marvel's stories seem to just connect time and time again. They always end their movies with post-credit scenes that leave you wanting more, and just a whole universe of connected stories is really fun to keep up with and watch. And personally, I prefer Marvel over DC. It's what I grew up with, obviously. I grew up watching Iron Man, the Hulk, and then getting into the Captain America series with all my friends and just going through the timeline. And I just became intrigued with the storytelling, and like I said, how they always leave you coming back for more. And then I like the DC movies, and I like how they're darker in nature, like we talked about. I kind of wish Marvel had more of that, like Marvel's shows that were on Netflix, Daredevil, Punisher. Those kind of give that DC tone. They're darker, but their movies don't carry over the same weight. And I just feel like I have more of a connection with the Marvel characters instead of the DC heroes.
Yeah, it's like, speaking of that connection, it's like, because Marvel's done a lot better job of sort of connecting all their movies. Like, when I saw Avengers Endgame for the first time and like Iron Man dies at the end, it really like hits home.
It's like,
because like I remember when I was a little kid, like flying around my living room with my Iron Man action figure, like, and it's like, seriously, like that's what I think about. It's like, but like DC hasn't done anything that compelling.
No, it's just, I feel like it's harder to connect with their characters. And I also think there's been so many Batman movies, so many, like throughout the 90s, and we got our first like iteration of Iron Man in 2008. There weren't movies previously that had Iron Man, Captain America, and all this in it. So it's kind of like a newer take on things, but I prefer Marvel.
Right. Jess, which of the two do you prefer?
Well, if we're going based off like what we watched in our childhood, I'm Power Rangers, but since that's not like an option, I definitely nowadays prefer Marvel. I can understand the story that's happening. I have a better connection to the characters, and I really like Marvel's consistency throughout the story. Like we've talked about, whenever DC doesn't like their ratings at the box office or how much they're earning, they just hit the reboot button. And Marvel kind of sticks through it, and they keep moving the story forward, and they just keep building up to that final project like we saw in Endgame, like we saw in Infinity War, whereas I just don't see that with DC. It just kind of seems rushed and honestly a bit lazy.
Yeah, it's like, how many Batmans are we on now? We got Robert Pattinson. Like, Ben Affleck didn't even get his own solo movie before they rebooted that.
It's tragic.
Gosh. Liam, who is your all-time favorite character?
Well, I did a lot of thinking about this. I was going to say Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I'm not going to say that anymore because JR was kind of just crapping on him. You guys saying Tobey's the best, which I agree. Tobey is phenomenal. But I got to say Iron Man, man. That was like the first superhero movie I think I can like vividly remember watching. The amount of times I watched that on my dad's laptop, I can't even count. I mean, this was the time when you actually like could put a DVD into the laptop. And we act like that's so long ago, but like it really wasn't. But it's like when I think of Marvel, I think of him as like the leader of Avengers and stuff like that. Also, just Robert Downey Jr. I mean, he absolutely kills that role every single time. I mean, he's absolutely hilarious. Does a phenomenal job of acting. Just his whole presence on screen, and then how he portrays Iron Man, I think is just he kicks it out of the park every single time.
Yeah, and I think like, it seems like he was the role he was born to play, just like Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool. Like, it's the role they were born to play. I mean, me personally, it's Spider-Man. I shared my thoughts on Tobey earlier, but I honestly have liked all three versions of Spider-Man. That's why No Way Home was such a treat for me. And I hate how like Spider-Man fans like turn against each other sometimes. Not a single version, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, none of them deserve hate. I do kind of get the Iron Man Jr. point of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but No Way Home fixed that. He's finally his own Spider-Man now.
Yeah, I'd agree. And speaking of No Way Home, I think that like just seeing them all together for the first time ever on screen was just something that everyone was looking forward to. Obviously, no one really knew, but it was a pretty good idea that it was going to happen. But I remember sitting in that theater and seeing the portal open up and Andrew Garfield walk in, and the whole theater just like erupted.
Oh my God,
and
it was like a football game.
That was great.
When I saw No Way Home on opening night, and like Andrew came out, and everyone was like, and then like when Ned's like, find Peter Parker, he like opens up the other portal. I'm like, Toby.
Dude, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it right now. But like that's so cool about Marvel and stuff. Like Kirk was saying, how everything's so connected. Like everything kind of overlaps with each other. Like the post-credit scenes, they tease the next movies, or even they come back to ones that like events that have already happened. After the Black Widow movie, the end credit scene is Black Widow's sister crying at her grave, and some lady comes up and is like, "Oh, you want to see the person who killed her? It's Hawkeye." And then that leads right into the show.
Exactly. DC could definitely take notes when it comes to continuity.
You'd hope so.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us. It's been quite the discussion, but that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our panelists for their opinions and everyone behind the scenes for making this program possible. Be sure to subscribe to Longwood COMM Studies on YouTube to get notifications when the next episode is streaming. I'm your host, Nick Robinson, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching Tomorrow's Talk Today and tuning in to another great season of Tomorrow's Talk Today.